The lectionary text starts off kind of midstream, as often they do. They came from that place. Unless we've been reading a little bit earlier, and we have, but it might be difficult to gain any kind of context of what just happened. Well, I'm glad you asked. Jesus and James and John and Peter were up on the mountain, what we call in the church the Transfiguration. They saw and heard something very powerful and special in that they see Jesus dazzling, this bright translucent white, and then they hear the voice of God in some way, shape, or form. And the words that God shares with Peter, James, and John, the gospel writer lets us privy to, "This is my son, listen to him." Listen. Got it. Peter, James, and John come down the mountain with Jesus, and they come into kind of a hornet's nest. Jesus has left the rest of the disciples, the men and women who follow him behind. He's kind of left them to keep a watch over the fort, and they're in trouble. They're drowning. A guy has brought his son who is possessed by some form of something demonic, and he comes to Jesus and says, "Listen, I took my son to your disciples, and they tried to help him. They tried to heal him. They tried to cast it out, but they couldn't do it. And now here the scribes and the teachers of the law are arguing with them, and there's a heated debate." And so I picture the father saying, "Oh, finally, you're here. This has gone really off the rails. My son is here, and your disciples couldn't help. If you could do something to maybe help him." And again, in this very kind of human fashion, Mark has Jesus reporting him saying, if I can do something? And then in a kind of this exasperated moment, kind of like we had a couple weeks ago when we talked about the Syrophoenician woman and Jesus needing to get away from the crowds a little bit. He's exasperated. He says, "How long do I have to put up with this faithless generation? You folks don't believe anything. You have no hope. You have a very small concept of what God can do." And in one of, I think is one of the most beautiful prayers in all the Bible, in my opinion. The dad says to Jesus, "Lord, I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I believe things are possible. But help me in my disbelief, because my son has been going through this for a long time. And it's not that I haven't been praying. It's not that I haven't been hoping. It's not that I haven't had faith. But my life experience tells me, don't get your hopes up too high. You'll be disappointed. Because those prayers haven't been answered. And he's still struggling. And I'm at my wit's end." What an honest prayer, right? So, sorry, this isn't our text yet today. You're going to say, "Oh my gosh, how long is the sermon going to be?" All right, here we go. But this is what's just happened, all right? Jesus heals the boy. He convulses. People think he's dead. It's very dramatic. Jesus brings him back. And then he takes the disciples back to Galilee. In essence, he regroups. He says, "All right, guys, let's go back to where we started." And on the way, as Jesus is bringing them from this place of pretty much failure, this has not been a good day at the office for the disciples. They haven't gotten it done. So as he's bringing them back to Galilee, he says, "The Son of Man is going to suffer and be killed." And they are afraid and confused. And so it says, nobody dared ask him any questions. I mean, we saw what happened when Peter said, Jesus asked, "Who do people say that I am?" And they say, "You're Elijah or Elijah or one of the prophets or John the Baptist come back." And then Jesus asked them, and then Peter says, "You're the Messiah." And then Jesus next minute saying, "Get behind me, Satan." So nobody's saying anything because maybe they don't want to be embarrassed. Maybe they don't want to be humiliated. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they don't want to know. And this strikes me as a preachable moment too, because today we make up our minds about something, we hear something, and instead of getting curious or asking more about somebody else's opinion or somebody else's thoughts, we just kind of dismiss it, or we just kind of pull our tents in. Instead of seeking to understand more deeply or asking a question, we just say nothing instead of engaging. I wonder how this might have been a little different, this journey with the disciples, had they asked Jesus a little bit more. But in any event, Jesus brings them back to Galilee, and in a moment that I describe as a teacher coming into or a principal coming into a classroom after kids have been throwing spit wads at each other, or you come in and there was a loaf of fresh baked bread on the table, and now it's gone, and the dog is looking very guilty over in the corner, and you say, what did you do? Jesus asked the disciples, hey guys, what were you talking about on the road back here? Dead silence. Like a bunch of guilty red-handed, caught red-handed, they don't want to say anything. Nobody wants to give it up. Because it says they've been arguing about who's the greatest. How ironic. For the second time, Jesus is talking about emptying yourself, self-sacrifice, not being so self-absorbed, that this journey is going to take him into a place of pain, of confrontation, even of death. And in the moment, right after they blew it, they're talking about who's the best, who's going to have the parking lot for the employee disciple of the month, who gets to wear the badges and the gold stars and the bling. Gosh, so Jesus, I'm sure at this point, how do I get through to these guys? How do I get their attention? And it's so easy for us to read this text and say, man, those disciples, these guys just don't get it, right? I mean, these guys are clueless. Them. What a bunch of idiots. And then it smacks me really hard when I read this text and I think, now wait a minute. What's really going on here is the disciples have a Christology. They believe that Jesus is this: a strong man, a messianic leader, somebody who's going to kick some butt of their enemies, who is on our side, who's not going to challenge them too much, as long as they can have positions of power. So there Jesus is here, and Jesus is trying to tell them, no, this is who I am. You're missing it, guys. And I think it should give us real long pause. If the people who traveled with Jesus, heard him actually preach, who were with him in flesh and blood, who ate with him and slept by him, if they so easily missed what Jesus is trying to tell them. Remember what God told the disciples up on the mountain. This is my son, listen. Yeah, Jesus is talking. They're not hearing. But maybe we aren't either. If Jesus came and sat down at your lunch table today or at the dinner table at your house, pulled up a spot on the couch while you're watching the game, muted it for a second and said, hey, let's talk about how you see me. Do you think there might be a few things that we're off on? Do you think he might challenge? Might say something about maybe being comfortable? Choosing security rather than risks? Might he say something about our dependence on stuff? What would he say to you or to me? Again, these guys are idiots. Wouldn't have anything to tell us, right? Maybe not. So to get the picture to the disciples, Jesus brings, I seem to be leaking Kleenex today. Jesus brings this little child up. It's in the Greek, it's paidon. And this is not, I don't want to make sure we're not confused here. This isn't, when Matthew says, Jesus says, bring the little children to me, for theirs is such as the kingdom of heaven. That's not what's going on here. Jesus is talking about one such as this. If you welcome one in my name, who is in the eyes of Rome, in the eyes of society, children are on the bottom rung of the ladder. The word paidon means little child, but it also means slave. Somebody who's not going to, if you're in a relationship with them, you're not going to get any financial benefit out of it. They're not going to help enhance your reputation or introduce you to people of who's who. There's not going to be any real return for you. It's just welcoming them in my name because they're a child of God and because they are valued by God and they should be valued by you equally. Here's one of those dynamic phrases of Jesus, much like Matthew 25, where Jesus says, it's important to have this relationship between us and God, your personal relationship with God, this prayerful life, this piety with God, your holiness, but welcoming one such as this child who is powerless, who has no rights in the eyes of society, who's invisible to so many, who's on the margins. You welcome him in my name, you welcome me. Echoes of, that's what you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. It's a powerful theological statement to say that this relationship with God is equivalent to the relationship we have with everybody else. I see a lot of folks really on fire for God, singing praise songs, having it on their Blu-ray, and talking about God all the time. And everybody else, how we treat everybody else, maybe not so much. And Jesus says, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you're going to follow me, if you're going to live like me, those two things are reciprocal. They're intimately tied, equal. And so he brings this little child, he holds the child before them. Welcome one such as this in my name, and you welcome me. And here's where it gets really good. It's almost comical. I mean, it's been comical a little bit so far. The ways of the disciples are missing it. And this isn't part of the lectionary, but I think it's super important because Mark plays on that in my name linkage. Jesus has just gotten done telling them about self-sacrifice, about not being self-absorbed, about the path of servanthood and humility, this road of what a disciple looks like, welcoming one in my name, broadening the welcome. And here comes John, son of thunder, we're told his nickname is. And I wonder how one gets the nickname son of thunder. Maybe because he's a loud personality, maybe because if John's coming down the aisle, a storm's coming with him, a little volatile. John comes, I imagine very proudly, but this is conjecture, he can't read emotions into the text. And he says, Lord, right after Jesus just got done teaching them about welcome a little child in my name. We saw this guy casting out demons. Didn't we just say that they just blew it trying to exorcise a demon from this guy's son? We just saw this guy. He didn't have his union card. He didn't have a permit. He said he was doing these things in your name, and we shut it down because he wasn't one of us. He said, we don't recognize you. You're not one of Jesus' card-carrying followers. Now again, we would never do this kind of thing, right? I mean, I've never heard anybody say, oh, those Baptists, they're really conservative. So we're not going to listen to anything somebody from that church might say because God's not working in them like God's working in us. Or we never get territorial about a ministry. How dare so-and-so say or suggest that I should change this about my ministry that I, put all my sweat and tears in? I'm sorry, whose ministry was it? Jesus's or yours? All right, anyway. We never play this. And isn't it powerful? Because Mark has John saying the very thing that Jesus just taught them. He was doing it in your name. And so he told him to stop. And Jesus says, welcome them in my name. Lower your pride. See God in places you haven't seen God before. Get off your spiritual high horse. Put away the measuring stick. Again, challenging John's Christology and ours. This text is so rich and beautiful. It brings me to the U2 song, In the Name of Love, Pride, because there's this powerful balance. And I want to, in this moment, I want to be able to ask Jesus a question. Lord, I understand that on the one hand, I'm supposed to be much more inclusive than I probably am in the ways that people are engaged in holiness with you in your name, in ways that I put a label or I dismiss because they're not a Christian like me. It reminds me of, when I was in high school, I was dating this girl. We went to this youth group. We were going to go to a volleyball tournament from kids from all over churches and schools all over the Cleveland area. And I'll never forget, before we got in the vans, he said, now listen, some of these kids aren't saved like you guys are saved. Some of them aren't Christians, so don't be yoked with them. Don't talk to or associate with them. And I thought, wait a minute. I'm not supposed to talk to some? How would I know if I don't? I thought we were playing volleyball, we were going to have fun, and we were going to. They're not like us. Us, them. And so I think about, okay, where's that hard balance between open to people and seeing God in your name, and then when somebody in your name does something that hurts somebody, you too, in the name of love, shots ring out in the Memphis sky, in the name of God, in the name of love, child crusades, Spanish Inquisition, Salem witch trials, Proud Boys kneeling in prayer before they enter into a fray with weapons. They got tattooed crosses, Jesus 2020, and then at the same time, violently attacking those that they probably never sat down and had a conversation with. The text doesn't really deal with that piece of it. But Jesus does say, whoever is with us is not against us. And those who you think are first are going to be last. This is an upside-down kingdom. This text really has a lot more challenge beneath the surface than just the nuts and bolts of kind of dressing down the disciples or them feeling kind of sheepish or not understanding, and so they're silent. No, it's really a challenge for any who would read it or hear it today and through the ages. If you follow me, if you want to live like me or serve like me, think about what you're doing in my name. As pastors, we take an oath that we would, whether we're preaching or teaching or in the hospital room with somebody, that we do no harm. We do our very best, just like a doctor, you do your very best, but you seek above all else not to do harm to another, not to damage their spiritual journey, to walk with them and not force them. And so I wonder, my brothers and sisters, I think this text has more questions than answers. Who would it be that you and I might go running to Jesus and said, see, I told them to stop because they're not like me. This is my son. Do a lot of hearing, but are we listening? And like those first disciples, where does our picture of Jesus maybe need Jesus to retune it and challenge us in the journey?